Welcome back to the Daughters of the Moon podcast. Mom and I are so grateful that you can join us today. We have Dennis J. Henson back. We're doing number 3 of our 12-part series with Dennis on his book, Real Impact. And today we are going to do a little bit of a longer one, but it's a really good story. So it's called Providence, and it's about Abraham Lincoln. So that's what we're going to listen to today. So welcome back, Dennis. We're super excited to have you on with us today.
Thank you so much. This is always fun.
Okay, so I will just share my screen here.
Providence. Abraham Lincoln is remembered as one of America's greatest presidents, so much so that until recently his birthday was a national holiday. He's known for his log cabin birthplace, honesty, and stovepipe hat. However, he also significantly impacted the direction of our nation through watershed moments, including the Lincoln-Douglas debates, becoming the first Republican president, and the Gettysburg Address. But what most people don't know is the improbable series of events that allowed him to become the 16th president of the United States. What changed this barefoot boy, who was so poor that his pants were always too short, into one of the most successful attorneys in Illinois? What transformed the son of illiterate parents from the backwoods of Kentucky into one of the world's greatest orators? And how did that poor farm boy, with little or no schooling, become the president of the United States? Abraham Lincoln had less than the equivalent of a first-grade education, yet his speeches have been renowned as some of the most eloquent in the history of the world. How did that happen? And what circumstances prove his rise to power was Providence? A humble beginning. The boy's life was a struggle. He was born in a tiny dirt floor log cabin deep in the Kentucky backwoods. His father, Thomas, a cabinet maker, had recently spent his life savings purchasing their farm. Yet a title dispute cost him all his land and most of his money. Consequently, young Abe's family was forced to move several times, finally squatting in a thick, dangerous Indiana forest on government land. 7-year-old Abe once again found himself in a tiny cabin surrounded by dense woods filled with wild animals. The little boy's father gave him an axe and put him to work cutting trees, notching logs, chopping firewood, and fetching water from a stream 2 miles away. Abe's mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, a talented seamstress, tried hard to make her family comfortable. She cooked, cleaned, made clothes, and recited poems and scriptures from the Bible. Little Abe loved to listen and had the unique ability to hear something and repeat it almost verbatim. Neither Nancy nor Thomas had a formal education. The only books in the home were the Bible, a catechism, and a spelling book. Even though little Abe couldn't read, he enjoyed looking at the pages and longed to understand their meaning. In the following 2 years, their little farm began to take shape, but then Nancy fell ill from milk sickness. With no doctors or medicine nearby, the disease took her life in a short time. Abraham was only 9 when his precious mother passed away. The young boy was devastated. Abe remained despondent, even though his sister Sarah did her best to be a mother to him. He had no way of knowing that this would be the first in a series of events that would ultimately lead him to greatness. A new mother. The next providential event occurred when Thomas, knowing he needed help, left little Abe and Sarah alone and headed back to Kentucky. Upon his arrival in Elizabethtown, he learned that a previous acquaintance, Sarah Bush Johnston, had recently become a widow. So Thomas visited her and made his proposal. "I have no wife, and you no husband. I came a purpose to marry you. I know you from a gal, and you knowed me from a boy. I've no time to lose, and if you're willing, let it be done straight off." The following day, Sarah and Thomas were married in a log house on Elizabethtown's main street. When the two, along with Sarah's 3 children, returned to the Indiana cabin, little Abe and sister Sarah were excited to have a mom again and relished their new playmates. They also appreciated their help in the fields. The merged family quickly bonded, and Abe's new stepmother loved him as much or more than her own children. And when Mother Sarah saw the makings of a great man in him, another remarkable event took place. After learning of a school opening several miles from their farm, Sarah enrolled young Abe. She saw that he attended the classes each day. Abraham loved school and appreciated learning. He even created his own book of sums to help him with math problems. Nancy Hanks Lincoln's cousin, Dennis Hanks, joined them at the farm for an extended stay during this period. While there, he taught young Abe his ABCs and helped him with reading. Because Abe's father cared little about his education and needed his help, Abe was forced to drop out of school. Yet with his new mother's encouragement, he never stopped studying. Sarah kept him at his lessons and gifted him her books. Soon young Abraham was spending his free time reading books such as The Life of Washington, Aesop's Fables, Pilgrim's Progress, and the King James Bible. He even took his books to the field to read while plowing and resting his horse. The boy's habit. Young Lincoln became a virtual vacuum, eagerly consuming every book, newspaper, pamphlet, article, or anything else he could find to read. For years, he read by firelight deep into the night and resumed at the first sign of the sun. Although he completed his chores, he had marked preference for reading, writing, and ciphering. Once he had read and reread the books in his home, Abraham walked to the nearest trail. He befriended any hunter, trader, peddler, or politician who chanced by. If a traveler had a book, Lincoln was sure to have a look. He even borrowed from his neighbors and once boasted, "I've read every book within 50 miles of my home." He read texts such as Nicholas Pike's New and Complete System of Arithmetic and Thomas Dilworth's New Guide to the English Tongue, and classics like Robinson Crusoe, Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, and anything else he could find. Although he became more knowledgeable through reading, the teenager realized that his grammar was inferior, and though he was surrounded by illiterate parents and neighbors, he knew where to find help and was quoted as saying, "The things I want to know are in books. My best friend is the man who will get me the book I ain't read." Abraham continued to work in the fields throughout his teens, swinging his axe and reading. In those days, it was the custom for families to rent out their children until they turned 21, and Thomas made prime use of that custom. So in addition to his chores, Abraham was obligated to chop trees, split fence rails, and do other work for his neighbors. With all that physical labor and reading, he eventually became a knowledgeable and muscular young man. Young Lincoln always carried a book, and it was common to see him with an axe in one hand and a book in the other. But as time passed, he grew weary of his labor and began to resent his father. When he was 22, his family moved again, settling in central Illinois. After that move, Abraham left his family to seek his fortune and took whatever honest work he could find. Yet he especially liked sailing cargo down the Mississippi River on flatboats. The main reason was the boat owners brought a stack of newspapers and a copy of A History of the United States. So on these trips, Abe had more to read than ever before. Marooned. The following year, Abraham continued to do odd jobs and ferry cargo. Fate stepped in on his last voyage when his flatboat became stranded on a sandbar near New Salem, Illinois. As the crew struggled to free the vessel, a large crowd formed. The town's citizens watched as a tall, lanky fellow took charge. Under his direction, the crew members unloaded the cargo from one side, causing the boat to shift. Then the impressed observer witnessed the boy go ashore, locate a copper shop, and borrow an auger. He then drilled a hole in the boat's bow, which allowed water to drain out of the boat to ease over the dam. The flatboat's owner, Denton Offutt, was impressed with Abraham's handling of this incident. He liked what he'd seen of New Salem. So he pledged to return to open a general store and asked Abe to join him in that venture. When the young ferryman agreed, he unknowingly took his next step toward his ultimate destiny. Imagine that. With more than 800 miles of shoreline, Abraham Lincoln's flatboat marooned precisely on the shores of New Salem, Illinois, a town most likely the only one along that voyage which contained a debating society. New Salem, 1831. Once the flatboat crew returned from New Orleans, Offutt fulfilled his pledge and opened the New Salem General Store. Lincoln was hired as the store's clerk and allowed to sleep in the back room. The town's residents were soon being entertained with yarns and funny jokes. In a short time, Abe was a town favorite, as the word spread of his humor, knowledge, and honesty. Honest Abe, as he was called, enjoyed the freedom his new job gave him to read and study English grammar. During this time, he engaged the local school teacher to help him with his writing and speaking skills. At his teacher's urging, Lincoln joined the New Salem Debating Society. There, he gave his first public speech and met many influential people. Impressed with what they heard, the townspeople convinced Lincoln to enter the Illinois General Assembly race. Although Abe was staying busy, the general store was losing money, and panic spread when Chief Blackhawk of the Sauk tribe and several hundred braves crossed the Mississippi into Illinois without warning. So the state's governor declared that males between 18 and 45 were obligated to enlist in a militia. When the call came, with the store failing, Offutt allowed Lincoln to enlist. The Army assigned Abraham to a battalion containing a number of his friends from New Salem. So when his company chose a captain, they picked Lincoln by a large majority. Although he saw no action, he demonstrated bravery and was highly respected. After his military discharge, he returned home and resumed his race for the General Assembly. Though his run was unsuccessful, he met many citizens throughout Illinois, some of whom would later help elect him to the legislature. Despite losing his first election, his enthusiasm for politics grew after he received 277 of New Salem's 300 votes. 1833. With the election over and out of work, Lincoln searched for new opportunities. But when many things he attempted failed, the people of New Salem appointed him their postmaster. And when the post office was moved to another town, he was tapped to be deputy to the county surveyor. Lincoln had strong desire to be successful at something. He wasn't sure what it was, and though he loved politics, he hesitated to enter for his lack of education and contacts. At that point, he described himself as a piece of floating driftwood. While strongly considering opening a blacksmith shop, an acquaintance offered to sell him a fully furnished general store on credit. The deal sounded too good to pass up, so Lincoln accepted the offer. Running his new store gave him ample time to do his favorite thing, reading. The old barrel. Many days were spent sitting under a tree near the store's entrance, studying English grammar and reading anything he could borrow from his customers. He consumed newspapers, textbooks, and classics like the works of Shakespeare and the poems of Robert Burns. Although he enjoyed his time, poor sales were pulling him into debt. In fact, except for 50 cents in his pocket, he was broke. One morning, while sitting under that tree, his eyes were drawn to an approaching covered wagon. The driver pulled up in front of him and steadied his horses. Jumping down, he walked toward Lincoln and exclaimed, "This pioneer life is not for me, and I'm taking my family back east. My wagon is overloaded. Will you take a look inside to see if there's anything you might want?" Since Abe had no money, he was hesitant and told the man he wasn't interested, but the driver was insistent. "What about this barrel? You can use it to store things. I'll let you have it for 4 bits, 50 cents. Could you take it off my hands?" Now, Lincoln didn't need another barrel. Most of his store's supplies arrived in barrels. Yet he reached in his pocket and handed the man his last penny. Bidding the traveler farewell, he placed the old relic in a back corner and forgot about it. After several months, he found a use for the barrel, and once he removed the top, he noticed it wasn't empty. Dumping the contents on the floor, Abraham was surprised when something heavy fell out. He looked more closely. There on the floor, partially covered by debris, lay a complete set of Blackstone's commentaries. These were Sir William Blackstone's 18th century essays on the common law of England. Lincoln wasted no time putting those books to use and spent the remainder of the summer consuming their pages. The more he read, the more interested he became, saying, "Never in my whole life was my mind so thoroughly absorbed. I read until I devoured them." Even before completing the essays, he started visiting courthouses and observing trials. Once he'd had a glimpse of those hearings, Abraham Lincoln realized his search for a profession had ended. And for the first time, he envisioned himself as an attorney. Lincoln then committed he'd do whatever it took to accomplish that goal. Who knows if this story of the barrel is true? A much older Lincoln often told it using the third person. I merely wrote what his listeners must have surmised. Yet some historians think it has merit. I know Lincoln had access to Blackstone's commentaries. It is irrelevant whether he got them from a farmer or his mentor and future business partner, John T. Stewart, but that he used them as the first step toward a highly successful legal career is an acknowledged fact. The law. The same year Lincoln decided to become an attorney, 1834, he was elected to the Illinois General Assembly. A short time later, Springfield attorney John T. Stewart befriended him and offered him use of his law library. At 23, Lincoln was still living in New Salem and managing his general store. What free time he had, he spent preparing to take the multiple steps required to pass the Illinois bar. Purchasing a book of legal forms, he drew up mortgages, deeds, and other documents for his friends at no charge. He even argued a few minor cases with Stewart's advice and encouragement. He often traveled 20 miles to his friend's office to retrieve and return law books. In 1836, his diligence paid off, and he was granted a license to practice law. The following year, the Illinois Supreme Court awarded him admission to the state bar. Then Mr. Lincoln started a career that he would pursue for the remainder of his life. He was no longer a floating piece of driftwood. Once the Illinois legislature adjourned, Lincoln saw little future in New Salem for his legal work or his political ambitions. Yet Springfield offered both. He was well known for his successful efforts to make that city the new state capital. So on a borrowed horse and with everything he owned in 2 saddlebags, Abraham Lincoln departed the city that gave him his political start. He boarded with friends for the next 4 years or stayed in country inns and farmhouses. Lincoln was 28 when he opened a law office with Stewart and became a circuit judge. His responsibilities required him to travel throughout Illinois, visiting numerous cities and courts. For months, he would journey with his clothes and toiletries in his saddlebag, and he always carried a few books for his entertainment on those long rides. In addition to his law career, Lincoln continued in politics and used his travels to broaden his base. Within a few years, he was earning between $1,200 and $1,500 a year when the state's governor was only receiving $1,200. In 1841, Stewart and Lincoln dissolved a partnership that had handled more than 700 cases. But another door opened when the top lawyer in Illinois, Stephen Logan, offered him a partnership. Upon accepting this position, his status as an attorney was significantly elevated. During those 2 years, Abraham Lincoln was introduced to and represented the most influential leaders in Illinois and the surrounding states. The railroad windfall. In 1857, Lincoln took another step toward destiny when he served as a lobbyist for the Illinois Central Railroad. After assisting them in getting a charter for the state, he was retained as the regular attorney. Upon successfully defending the ICR against the county in a tax matter, he received the largest fee of his legal career, $5,000, $166,000 in today's money. And by the time Abe became a prominent national politician, he was one of Illinois' most distinguished and successful attorneys. Lincoln's windfall from the railroad gave him the money and time to pursue his higher ambition, politics. Consequently, in 1858, he ran for the Illinois Senate. While Lincoln was inexperienced and awkward, his opponent, the incumbent, Senator Stephen A. Douglas, was rich, powerful, and charismatic. Fighting an uphill battle against a better financed and more organized opponent, Lincoln planned to follow Douglas and speak in the same cities. Suddenly, the idea of battling him face-to-face came to mind. So he wrote Douglas and challenged him to share a debate platform. Douglas certainly had no desire to elevate Lincoln to his level, but the fear of being called a coward prompted him to take on this lightweight. So Douglas, planning to put him in his place once and for all, accepted the challenge. Many thousands came to hear, and hundreds of newspapers reported their contest. Still, it wasn't until the 1860 publication of those deliberations that the Lincoln-Douglas debates legend began. And though Lincoln lost the Senate race, his published words introduced him to the nation. Chicago. In 1860, Lincoln had just entered the race for the standard-bearer of the newly formed Republican Party when Providence again appeared. This time it came from the city of Chicago. Chicago's businessmen, citizens, and politicians transformed Abraham Lincoln from an unknown backwoods lawyer into the Republican Party's candidate. Without her help, Lincoln would not have become the nominee. What was his appeal to the Windy City? He rarely visited there and had spent most of his time serving Southern Illinois. Even though Chicago was a growing metropolis and was striving to be a refined city, its working people, the voters, loved Abe's Western man image. They saw his tall, muscular, rough-looking, and disheveled appearance as their kind of candidate. Once he began to speak, Chicagoans were captivated by his earnest and powerful delivery. His image of a poor man's Caesar was enough to convince thousands to support this rail splitter. Even though her masses got behind him, he still needed the support of the city's middle and upper classes. When Lincoln spoke to her working men, he also drew the attention of her wealthy. The influential Eastern Illinois businessmen believed him to be their business's best protector once they examined his policies. While Lincoln touted his humble origins to her masses, he proclaimed conservative fiscal policy, protective tariffs, and railroad expansion to the upper crust. The city's elites not only offered Abe moral support, they also poured thousands of dollars into his campaign. Although as great as it was to have her numerous support, that would be irrelevant if the city wasn't chosen to host the Republican National Convention, and the prospects of that were extremely low. A site for the convention. Representatives of the Northern Republican segments gathered in 1859 to discuss the site of their convention. Each delegation argued it should be in its own locality. Cities like Buffalo, St. Louis, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Indianapolis seemed to have the upper hand on Chicago. However, the Illinois delegation lauded her as the only neutral site where everyone would have an even chance. Despite their allegiance to Lincoln, they never mentioned his name. After many votes, the choice came down to St. Louis and Chicago. Not to be outdone, the Illinois group pledged free food and a splendid reception for all the convention's members. As a kicker, they offered a grand convention hall at no cost. So with the promise of a cheap convention, the meeting site was snatched away from St. Louis by one vote, a single vote. The competition. Lincoln not only had the city's support, but was Illinois' favorite son. However, he would face a formidable list of more experienced and better-known opponents. William H. Seward was the most likely nominee. An experienced politician, he had been the governor of New York, a previous state, and the current United States senator. He had also amassed a powerful group of backers, a large amount of money, and the New York's delegation muscle. Seward brought many followers and a brass band, all in uniforms. The only thing he didn't have going for him was Chicago. Lincoln also faced two other formidable opponents, the well-known Republican senator and Ohio Governor Salmon P. Chase, and the influential Virginia politician Edward Bates. Each of these men held high political offices at the national level, and both had powerful friends who could easily put them in the White House. In contrast, Lincoln had only served in the Illinois General Assembly and as an Illinois congressman. With the limited knowledge of a small-time politician, he couldn't possibly match his competitor's experience. So going into the convention, all signs pointed to an effortless defeat of the rail splitter. The Chicagoans' plot. Understandably, Lincoln himself was skeptical about receiving the nomination. Yet, he'd underestimated the power of his backers. His Chicago supporters were not only well organized, but they also put together a flawless plan. Immediately following the site conference, their team sprang into action. Norman Judd, a prominent lawyer, persuaded the railroads to provide cheap fares for all parts of Illinois, so Lincoln enthusiasts could flood the convention without worrying about the cost. Then came their marketing campaign. Newspapers were the only media of the day, so the considerably influential Chicago press began publishing articles promoting Lincoln as the nominee. That meant the first thing convention delegates would see in the morning papers was a strong endorsement of Honest Abe. Lincoln's devotees marched in the streets daily, touting the rail splitter. However, it would be on the convention floor where they would turn the tide. Prominent Chicagoan Norman Judd and Joseph Medill were conveniently appointed to handle the seating arrangement for both the audience and the delegates. Somehow, Lincoln enthusiasts found tickets easy to procure, while the other candidate supporters found gaining entrance difficult. Inside the convention hall were wall-to-wall Lincoln fans, while outside, the attractively uniformed Seward protagonists had no way to influence the delegates. Therefore, the nation's representatives only saw a hall full of passionate Lincoln devotees touting their favorite son's auspices. Next, the Chicagoans carefully isolated the New Yorkers from the other state delegations who weren't in Lincoln's camp. They then secured a simple majority rule. And after accomplishing that, the plot's final and most crucial phase was put into action: behind-the-scenes politicking. It was common knowledge the battleground states of Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania thought Lincoln's competitors too radical on the issues to be electable. So the Chicago team took charge and, backed by a committee of their politicians, held closed-door meetings. They visited each delegation to convince them Lincoln was the only man who could glean the nation's support. Despite ethics, Lincoln's team stopped at nothing. They spread a rumor that 5 state governors had threatened to resign if Seward should be nominated. Then, without the authority to do so, they offered key delegates high-level positions in the Lincoln administration. Each man was assigned a specific state. Their goal was to cut off support for Seward and win them over to the rail splitter. Indiana was the first to be turned by promises of a prominent position in Lincoln's cabinet. The deals were struck with New Jersey and Pennsylvania, both fervent followers of Seward. Those delegates agreed to make Lincoln their choice should Seward show weakness on the first ballot. The team worked tirelessly until the last vote was cast. 3 of 4 battleground states were now in Lincoln's camp. It would be up to the Chicago delegates and their crowds to fan the flames. With negotiations closed and deals secured, all of Chicago watched as the convention played out. The Republican Convention. When the meeting was called to order, the New Yorkers rose first and exclaimed support for their favorite son, Seward. His few devotees inside the hall applauded so loudly that it annoyed the other delegates. Nonetheless, the work of the Chicago team started paying dividends when Lincoln's name was first mentioned. One reporter recalled, 5,000 people jumped to their feet at once. The audience erupted like a wild colt with a bit between his teeth. It rose above all cries for order. Again and again, their irrepressible cheers broke forth and bounced off the walls. Their outcries were repeated to the dismay of other delegates. Seward took the lead on the first ballot, but failed to take the majority. Simultaneously, behind closed doors, the Chicagoans again put their plot into action. The second ballot showed a remarkable improvement for Lincoln. The tight race now stood between only 2, Lincoln and Seward. The tension in the hall was palpable. When the voting continued, Lincoln received gains from Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, bringing him within an eyelash of victory. The packed hall was about to burst out at the seams with tension at a fever pitch. Seconds passed, like hours, as the vote came down to Ohio. 10,000 eyes were fixed on the delegation from the Buckeye State. After what seemed like an eternity, Ohio announced that 4 of her delegates had switched their votes to Abraham Lincoln. One reporter wrote, "There was a brief moment of silence. Then there rose a noise like a rush of a terrible storm." Outside the hall, cannons fired and people danced in the street. All of Chicago rejoiced for their favorite son. The real splitter was the Republican nominee for president of the United States. From the celebration, you'd think Lincoln had already won the presidency. And though Honest Abe walked away with the prize, he realized that he wouldn't be nominee had the convention been held elsewhere. And he knew his chances of actually becoming president were abysmal. In fact, his prospects were so poor that it would probably take an act of God for him to triumph. So despite the cannon fire, street dancing, and hoopla, the Democrats were still sure to win the election. And though Lincoln had his party's nomination, his ascent to the presidency was improbable, if not impossible. The election of 1860. Here are a few of the myriad obstacles between Abraham Lincoln and the presidency. After the convention's shenanigans, many Republicans were upset with the outcome, meaning a split in the party wasn't only possible, but quite likely. Lincoln's views were polarizing, and the voters either loved or hated him. The country was extremely divided on the issue, and the vast majority didn't believe Lincoln had the answer. Most newspapers did not support him and allowed his opponents to paint him as inexperienced. Since he wasn't photogenic, their cartoonist had a field day with his looks. Abe's likely competition, the Honorable Stephen Douglas, had soundly defeated him in the Illinois Senate race only 2 years earlier. Adding to their concerns, a third party emerged, the Constitutional Union Party. Their views were similar to the Republicans and would most certainly peel away crucial votes. Yet by far Abe's worst problem was that 10 out of 34 states wouldn't even allow his name on their ballots.
Wow.
So Lincoln's chances were not only slim, they were so bad it would take a miracle for him to emerge with a victory. Yet Lincoln and his party had no way of knowing that the Democratic Party was in shambles. They should have been the party of unity. However, they were deeply divided. The Southern Democrats walked out of the first convention, and the convention ended without a nominee. With such confusion among the ranks, it was unclear if the Democrats would even have a candidate for the 1860 election. 2 months later, they made another attempt, but the Southerners again left in disgust. The delegates who remained named Douglas as their candidate. When the South learned of this, they formed another party, the Southern Democrat Party. That new party voted to have John Breckinridge as their candidate. So with the Democrats split in two, 4 parties offered their nominees to the electorate: the Republicans, the Constitutional Union Party, the Southern Democrats, and the Democrat Party. These changes resulted in Lincoln's miracle. When the Americans voted for president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln won in a landslide. Douglas only received 12 electoral votes, not nearly enough to offer Lincoln a serious challenge. The Southern ballots were split between Breckinridge with 72 and Bell with 39. So with 180 electoral votes, Abraham Lincoln became the 16th president of the United States.
Wow.
Which brings us back to the story's original question. What transformed the son of illiterate parents from the backwoods of Kentucky into one of the world's greatest orators? And how did that poor farm boy with almost no schooling become the president of the United States? How is it that Lincoln's speeches have been renowned as some of the most eloquent in the history of the world, considering he had less than the equivalent of a first-grade education? What circumstances prove his rise to power with prominence? Answers? As for answers to those questions, Lincoln, the teenager, said it best. The things I want to know are in books. Was it Providence, or was Lincoln just lucky? I'll let you decide. But looking at his life in its entirety, few would consider him lucky. What are the chances? What are the chances that a young boy's illiterate mother would take ill and die, leaving the door open for a stepmother who would see he received an education? What are the chances that a woman would accept a pitiful proposal from a man she had not seen in several years?
Yeah.
What are the chances a young boy with less than 1 year of school would learn to read and make reading a habit? What are the chances on an 800-mile voyage, a flatboat would become stranded precisely on the shore of a town with a debate club? What are the chances a friend would offer him a fully stocked general store entirely on credit? What are the chances a farmer would sell him an old barrel containing a complete set of Blackstone commentaries? What are the chances a prominent attorney would make a complete law library available to him? What are the chances the top law firm in Illinois would offer a partnership to an inexperienced rookie? What are the chances a railroad would pay an astronomical sum for winning a single case? What are the chances a sitting United States senator would agree to debate a no-name lightweight? What are the chances the city of Chicago would embrace a simple rail splitter? What are the chances the powers in Chicago would rig the convention to ensure Honest Abe's nomination? And what are the chances the Democrats would split in two, leaving a path for a virtually unknown to walk away with the presidency? Luck or providence? What do you think? Lincoln's reading list: The Life of Washington by Mason Locke Weems, Aesop's Fables, The Arabian Nights, compiled by Sir Richard Francis Burton, Slavery, discussed in original essays by Leonard Bacon, The History of the U.S., by George Bancroft. Editorials by Henry Ward Beecher. The Bible, compiled by King James. Commentaries on the Law, William Blackstone. The Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan. Poems by Robert Burns. Poems by Lord Byron. Don Juan by Lord Byron. The New and Complete System of Arithmetic, Nicholas Pike. Elements of Character, Mary Chandler. Speeches, Henry Clay. Robinson Crusoe, Daniel Defoe. A New Guide to the English Tongue, Thomas Dilworth. Journals and Debates of the Federal Constitution, Jonathan Elliott. Euclid's Geometry. Sociology of the South, by George Fitzhugh. History of Illinois, Thomas Ford. Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Edward Gibbon. The Theory and Practice of Surveying, Robert Gibson. Fanny, with Other Poems, Fitz Green Halleck. Poems, Oliver Wendell Holmes. Poems, Thomas Hood. Mormonism, John Hyde. Joe Miller's Book of Jests, Joe Miller. Commentaries on American Law, James Kent. Poems by William Knox. Poems by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Complete Works of Edgar Allan Poe. Lives, Plutarch. Ancient History, Charles Rollins. An Authentic Narrative of the Loss of the American Brig, James Riley. Lessons in Elocution, William Scott. Complete Works of William Shakespeare. The Life of George Washington, Mason L. Weems. Liberty, John Stuart Mill. And Analogy of Religion, Joseph Butler. When you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on. Abraham Lincoln.
Good story. Really good story.
That was a good story.
Kind of amazing, wasn't it?
It really
I have a daily list. I have a time management system that works for me very well. And every day when I come to my computer, I open Today, and there's a list of things there to do. And I had written on my list for one day when I came in, it said, remove the Lincoln story from the book. At that particular time, it was only about a page and a half. And it just kind of said that he failed quite a few times. And just before I started to take it out, I thought, well, maybe there was something more interesting. If I do a little bit of research, maybe I can find something that would cause me to want to leave the story in there. So after researching a little bit, I found this, one of the things that happened, and I thought, wow, if things had not gone exactly that way, we wouldn't know the name Lincoln. I wonder if there are others. And so then it was like every day I found another and another and another. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And by the time I finished, I thought, he was meant to be the president. And that's where the name Providence came in. Was this Providence? Well, it sure looks like it, because the guy was not lucky. I mean, there's just no way you can contribute luck. If you look at everything that happened to him, he was born to a very poor family who were illiterate. He was born into a home that didn't even have walls all the way around. It was a lean-to with a dirt floor.
Wow.
So all of the things that bad happened to him, his father rented him out as kind of like a slave to work for other people and get paid for it. So anyway, when it all came together, I thought it made a pretty interesting story. And it also pointed out the importance of reading, because really the thing that changed Lincoln was that he loved to read, and he read every day. And that's why he was able to do the things that he eventually was able to accomplish.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you're open, like it seemed like, did seem like he just ended up in these situations that kind of just kept moving him forward. But I think too, if you're open to these situations and jump on them kind of like he did, you end up somewhere in a really good spot as opposed to just kind of, because he could have given up at any point, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that anybody would have blamed him.
Right. I think one of the most powerful parts of the story was when he started attending trials. And when he found himself in the courtroom, he felt like, well, this is what I want to do. You know, this is home. And I'll do whatever it takes to become an attorney. And that's really the turning point in people's lives when they decide, this is what I want, and I'll whatever it's going to take for me to get it, I'll do it. Well, things turn around at that point, and all of the universe starts sending things in your direction so that you can accomplish the impossible.
Yeah, that is so true. It's just, to me, it's amazing how that happens, right? When you become more
Yes.
open and you really become passionate about it. It is funny how you just sort of see these different things taking place, and it's like, yeah. I've had a few of those lately. It's just like, oh, interesting.
Nice.
Okay, nice. That's coming around, right? So it's just funny. The more I become focused, the more I become open to these situations.
It's true. Go after what you dream of.
Yes.
Yeah.
And reading also.
Reading. Yeah.
Reading is such a great thing. So speaking of reading, have you read all of the books that Abraham Lincoln has read?
Oh, no. I haven't. But I think it's good for people to have them so that if they wanted to read something every day and they were looking for something to read, but I would suggest that before they read those, they would turn to the back of the book and read those, because I have read all of those, and they're very powerful.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of the better stories in the book, but I think all of the stories are good, and
Yes.
I would suggest that everyone get a free copy. All they have to do is go to realimpactbook.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, click on Podcast Attendee, and then fill in your name and email, and it'll send you an instant download. In fact, you can have the ebook in your hand before we finish this podcast. That's how quickly the download happens. And it's the entire book, pictures and everything. And there are no strings. You will not be put on a mailing list. There are no strings. I wrote the book to help people. And
Right.
if people don't get it and use it to help them form the habit of reading every day, then I haven't helped them. And then I also hope that they will see the book and think, wow, this would be a great gift for my nephew or my niece, or have a business partner that's young ones are graduating, or a housewarming gift, or maybe a wedding party. You want to give something to the groomsman, someone who has the business. They're super gifts, and they're very affordable. You can get the paperback book for under $15 and the hardcover book for under $40. And it's beautiful. The hardcover book is really, really beautiful. And it's also, as you heard, an audiobook. That was just one of the audiobook stories. And you can get it free in ebook. So I hope everybody will go to realimpactbook.com. That's a fun website. It has games and free gifts. So you might want to go there just to explore and see what you can find. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it is a good website. And yes, the book is definitely highly inspirational. I know both Mom and I enjoyed reading it and being inspired by the different stories. And I know we've talked about this before, but it was just nice, like how you broke it down, where there's something to read no matter what your time limit is. And I agree with you. And that was something that my mom taught both my brother and I growing up, was reading is so important. So it's, definitely something to make a habit in your life because it just helps you move forward.
It makes a difference. Makes a difference.
Well, thank you for that. I hope it helps a lot of people.
Yes,
Yes, we do too.
us too. So thank you for joining us for number 3, and make sure everybody's tuning in. There will be 12 parts of this series, so make sure you tune into all of them because they're all really inspirational stories from the book that, Dennis is sharing with us, which we're so grateful for. And, it's very inspiring for everyone. So
Yes, it is. Very much. Very
So-
much.
thank you, Dennis.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you.
You're welcome. And everybody else, we will see you the next time.
You bet.